5, 4, 3, 2, 1, start. Okay, so we should all be synced up. And before we start talking about how this Blitz game is going to go, I want to say one more comment continuing from our discussion about the last game. And that's that if we look at an investment like getting armor upgrades for Mutalisks, you know, that investment wasn't doing anything. It didn't do anything in that game. And if we also look at the Longinus game where Savior got the Hydralisk upgrades, like the speed and the range, maybe he could have survived better without getting those upgrades. But those upgrades aren't about just surviving right now. They're all about your next move, what you're going to do, how you're going to put the pressure back on in the next chance you get. So you have to note about a player like Savior. Maybe he could have survived a little bit longer if he didn't make investments like that. But it's not a game plan that's ever going to lead anywhere. It's just going to make it take you longer to die. So you have to keep your eyes open on what kind of investments the players are making that didn't pan out, because that lets you know what they wanted to do if they would have had the chance, and then it also lets you know what their opponent was preventing them from doing, and you can really see the brilliance in the moves that people make in trying to predict those things and trying to prevent certain things from happening. So that's just one thing to note.
It's always really good whenever you're doing anything in StarCraft to say, how does this help me now and how will it help me later? For example, one of the best examples is if in Zerg vs Protoss, your Protoss opponent goes for a fast gas Corsair rush. I see a lot of players get an evolution chamber and throw down a spore colony. Now that's like a very immediate solution. What that also allows you to do is get the +1 carapace upgrade very, very, very early, which again is very critical for the strength of your Zerglings in the later stages of the game. So that's a really good example of how you can defend now against the Corsairs and help yourself later. And that's really the general theme of Bisu's play with these Corsairs, is that, yeah, it allows you to scout and kill off overlords, but in the mid and late game stages, especially in this game and the second game, we'll see that the Corsairs really allow Bisu to have tons of options and put tons of pressure on his opponent all throughout the game.
Yeah, definitely. These players are always thinking about long term and the next move and stuff like that. All your investments, you have to make your money go as far as it can.
That's why I'm really curious to see how the games would have panned out had, say, Bisu not done a lot of aggressive harassment. I mean, like little things like this, like throwing down the pylon, these things go from start to finish all 3 games for Bisu. He's blocking with the probes, he's coming with the Corsairs, and the drops and all the aggressive speed zealot play, etc., etc., etc. I mean, it makes me wonder what Savior's practice games were like. If his opponents played defensively just for 1 minute, Savior would have had like an unbelievable sick edge with having his main, his natural, a second gas natural, and then having like the bottom right gas as well.
Yeah, it makes me think that none of Savior's practice partners were capable of doing the type of harass that Bisu's doing.
Yeah, frankly, I think Protoss vs Zerg is a matchup that it really the whole point, the whole goal of Protoss throughout the game should be to put pressure on the Zerg. There, like so many other matchups, like Terran vs Protoss, Terrans can a lot of times just expand a lot. Oh, actually, let me clarify. By pressure, I don't mean so much like expanding a lot is a form of pressure, but I mean you have to put direct harassment on the Zerg opponent. You have to be really in his face all game. You can't quite passively expand sometimes, unless you're Daezang, and then you can do whatever you want. But I guess we're blabbing more about the general matchup theory as opposed to what's going on in the game. So let's focus a little bit more on that. Again, there's nothing too significant to note at this point. Again, as Noni pointed out in the previous game, Bisu's taking his assimilator when his core is halfway done. A really nice timing that'll give him a good gas advantage, especially considering he's making so many Corsairs. And then
yes,
also Savior is doing his double expand fast layer tech. Again, very, very, very standard by both players. But it's kind of surprising how little the Mutalisks did in all the games. I wonder what would have happened if Bisu, or excuse me, if Saber had just opted to go straight for lurkers and then hydralisk speed in these games, and only gotten some scores to deal with the Corsairs.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many ways that these games can branch. And we saw that Zealot get a rare drone kill on Savior. Usually Savior's very good at keeping all his drones alive.
Yeah.
You gotta be thinking that Savior, his mental state isn't exactly 100% at this point. I don't really want to focus on the psychology of the game. I'd rather just stick to strategy, but obviously there's some influence there. So yeah, here comes the Spire and the third gas here, and Savior's getting those drones ready to put it on the gas ASAP.
Oh yeah, this is another thing I wanted to mention, because I had a lot of friends watch this match last night, and they asked things like, why are the players not making any defenses? Bisu had one cannon at his front in games 1 and 2 and this game for a really long time, and Savior had nothing at his front. He hasn't even built any sunken colonies yet. I mean, his Mutalisks are basically the first units that he's making that can actually do anything. That really highlights the importance of scouting and making excellent, accurate assumptions based on the based on the small things that you can see, like the fact that the Lynx didn't have speed very early when Bisu was scouting with his probe. And what are some other small things? Like when he was harassing with the Zealot, just being able to count how many drones Savior had, and to see that, oh,
yeah.
Savior really hasn't made that many Zerglings, because there are a lot of drones in this expansion.
I'd also like to note here that Bisu started one cannon in his main before his Corsair had scouted that Mutalisks were coming, and that one cannon is key to get up. In this situation, those other cannons were finished well in time anyway, but you at least want that first cannon up there. And then of course once he did scout the Spire tech, he added some more cannons.
Yeah, and again, this, I feel, is still the huge problem that Savior's making in this game. Yeah, his fourth hatch went down right next to his central gas expansion, but then with his fifth hatch, he took the bottom right. And this is just so hard to defend all this stuff. Bisu didn't even really do anything directly to that bottom right expansion in this game. But still, one, it's something that Zerg would have to worry about if Bisu did want to try to make any sort of attack there. And two, it eats up some of the money, the choices that Savior makes with the larva at the bottom right. Savier's almost certainly going to be making drones at that bottom right and making sunken colonies at that bottom right, and that's money that Savior couldn't spend on defending his overlords and defending his expansions from these aggressive Zealot attacks we'll see in just a minute.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, I mentioned this earlier, that Savior is playing like this for the third game, because he already knows that Bisu is going to punish him for overextending himself, and yet he does get that bottom right expansion, and now the punishment's going to come in, and it seems like Savior felt like he could pull it off this time, but it's not going to work, and I don't really see like a big change in Savior's play to adjust to this aggressiveness, and so I don't know how he was planning to make it work this time.
Yeah, I mean that is one of I know exactly what kind of position Savior is in, though, because in a tournament, when you're preparing for a particular game, you're practicing your strategies and whatnot, and then if you get there and suddenly you realize that what your strategy is doesn't quite work against what your opponent's doing, it's very difficult to, on the fly, figure out what you should be doing and how to counter that effectively, just like ad-lib. So I think that Savior, it's always more important to trust in what you practice. So Savior is probably just going to try to slightly tweak what he practiced to try to beat Savior in these games. But again, these kind of attacks Savier's making are just, or by the Beast is making, is just so good. again, they're not the kind
These
of attack.
Corsairs are amazing.
Yeah, they really are. Like the key, the fundamental, like the crux of Bisu's strategy. And I mean, you'll note that Savior, despite all these losses, still has a ridiculous economy. With the bottom right expansion, you'll still see tons of workers mining at the second nat and the first nat. So this definitely is not an attack that will cause Bisu to win the game immediately. Savior will hold off this attack almost certainly every single time. But again, Bisu just does like non-stop aggression. So he's still wandering around with his Corsairs, trying to kill Overlords, sending in these Dark Templar. Really,
Yeah.
at really high levels, you generally don't win against a Zerg with one big swoop. You generally pick away at the Zerg and eventually win.
Yeah, and also Bisu's got his third Nexus up and running, and cannons up defending it. So you know, even if Savior was able to defend well for a while here, the Protoss macro that's already built up is going to be very difficult for Savior down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what's really amazing about these games. Is that we see this Dark Templar drop coming, and we see that I think that's the 6th gateway that he's adding on. So all this was done with less than 5 gateways, or 5 gateways or less throughout the game. And the fact that Bisu won pretty much by doing super harassment all game long is really a testament to how excellent this build is by Bisu. But again, not to take credit away from Savior, Savior's build is equally brilliant, although it's getting raped right now.
Yeah.
Against almost any other type of strategy, this is just an excellent play. As a lot of you didn't see in the first-person VODs, Savior was researching Overlord drop here, so he has the Overlord speed to help him deal with the Corsairs, and has Overlord drop, so that right when he's able to stabilize against the Corsairs, he can immediately mount a counterattack. And then Savior types out, and we have ourselves a new NBC champion.
Yeah, so again, just to re-emphasize what the major thing Bisu did was he analyzed this style of Zerg that Savior's so good at, and he saw the way the Corsairs can fit in there, so that the mass Corsair against either Mutalisk or against Lurker is going to be effective either way. And with an aggressive follow-up with this constant harass, constantly sending things in, the Corsairs only add in more confusion and more problems for the Zerg. So it's a long-term, it's a defensive build. I mean, the Corsairs scout, they defend, they harass, like they do everything. And the only drawback to them is that it takes a lot of skill to control them. But obviously, Bisu possesses that skill. And the other main thing is to just make your gateways work for you. He didn't mass gateways in the first or third games until very late. He was playing very macro-oriented, along with this very aggressive orientation. But it definitely wasn't. It definitely wasn't build a bunch of gateways and then try to do a killing blow. It was just macro up and do very effective harass and aggression along the way. So that's the brilliance of Bisu in this series.
And just as significant as what happened during the games is also what didn't happen. Savior almost never did anything really to fuck around with Bisu. You didn't see any lurker drops killing probes, you didn't see Mutalisk taking out probes, you didn't see Zerglings running around killing off pylons that Bisu placed to try to take expansions. Really, Bisu was able to take his third and fourth expansions almost completely uncontested in these games. And again, I suppose that's partly due to the fact that Savior's style was very much so expansion-oriented himself. But still, it's pretty incredible how easily and safely Bisu was able to take those expansions. And also, you can
definitely
imagine how flexible this opening is that Bisu has. That even if your Zerg opponent doesn't expand too much like Savior did in these games. You still have a lot of opportunities to kill off overlords. You get to see exactly what your Zerg opponent is doing. You can open up some Dark Templar harassment and whatnot. And having Dark Templar and a lot of Corsairs at that point in the game also makes for easy, uncontested expansion opportunities for Protoss, regardless of the fact that Savior expanded. The Zerg could have just played fairly safely, and it still would have been difficult to fuck around with the Protoss' third or fourth expansion.
Right, definitely. If Savior hadn't overextended himself, the Corsair DT would have prevented those further expansions, and Savior would have gotten his macro up and running, his economy up and running, a lot slower relative to the Protoss economy. So there's still an advantage, but not quite. You wouldn't see this this huge raping of drones the way you see, but you'd have to search for the advantage and really look into the game to see how the Corsair DT is effective, despite the DTs not actually killing stuff, but it is very powerful.
And also, what kind of shocked me is that in these games where you see Savior take, like, his expansion to hatchery ratio is almost 1-to-1 in the early stages of the game. It seems like he's almost never making an extra hatchery, like, just around so he can macro from it. He just really likes to take a lot of expansions early. And, this is what a lot of people consider to be a classic newbie mistake, is just to expand way too much stupidly and not have any defenses anywhere. But it's almost amazing that at that high of level, if Savior made a few minor tweaks to his game, it would be entirely possible for a Zerg player to take that ridiculously large amount of expansions that quickly against the Protoss players. So for you Zerg players who like expansions and, well, I guess who like winning, you can really learn a lot from the way Savior played, especially in those first-person VODs that are on TeamLiquid.net. You can really see how Savior sets himself up beautifully in a transitional sense to defending against harass early on, to taking all these expansions, securing them, and then immediately being able to apply direct pressure back on the Protoss. And that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess that about wraps it up.
Yeah, that's pretty much kick-ass.
So I guess we'll open a thread about this, and people can discuss this commentary. That'll be pretty cool.
But do note that we are right, so just take that into consideration before you post.
We're definitely 100% right, so
yeah.
You really won't be saying anything useful.
Just put happy faces and shit. So yeah,
just
thanks very much for listening. I'm Sean Plott, also known as Day 9.
And I'm Tyler Washleski, also known as Noonie.
And thanks for listening.
This was the MSL Finals. Thank you for listening.